The plasma cannons of the BlackHFY fleet carved through Earth's atmosphere like molten daggers, their synchronized bombardment reducing military installations to glass craters within the first hour. Admiral BlackHFY watched from the command deck of the Dominion's edge, his 4 eyes reflecting the orange glow of a burning planet below. The invasion was proceeding exactly according to their predictive algorithms. Resistance levels at 12% of projected capacity, reported his tactical officer Vrendok. Human military infrastructure neutralized, population centers showing expected panic responses. BlackHFY nodded, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. The BlackHFY had conquered 17 worlds using this exact methodology. Overwhelming firepower, predictive modeling, and systematic elimination of command structures. Humans appeared no different from the other species they'd subjugated, primitive, emotional, and utterly predictable. What the Admiral couldn't see from his orbital perch was the emergency meeting taking place 3 kilometers beneath the Colorado mountains. Dr. Lyra Voss, Earth's leading xenopsychologist, sat across from General Hadrian Cray in a bunker that hadn't appeared on any satellite scan for 30 years. "They're using textbook invasion protocols," Voss explained, her fingers dancing across holographic displays showing BlackHFY attack patterns. "Every strike follows optimal efficiency models. They target what their computers tell them to target." "Which means?" Cray asked, though his weathered face suggested he already suspected the answer. "They're fighting the war their machines think they should fight, not the war they're actually in." Voss pulled up psychological profiles compiled from intercepted BlackHFY communications. "Look at their command structure. Rigid hierarchy, algorithmic decision-making, zero deviation from established protocols. They've never encountered a species that fights back with pure chaos." On the surface, news anchor Tobias Merriweather broadcast from a subway tunnel, his usual polished demeanor replaced by grim determination. "Citizens of Earth, if you're hearing this, the impossible has become our reality. But remember, we are the species that invented jazz, that built art from garbage, that turned cooking into poetry. They may have bigger guns, but we have something they'll never understand." The BlackHFY intercepted the broadcast. Their translation, algorithms struggling with concepts like jazz and poetry. BlackHFY dismissed it as typical pre-surrender propaganda, failing to recognize the coded message embedded within Merriweather's seemingly rambling speech. Across the globe, seemingly random acts of resistance began. In Tokyo, former magician Ren Yamato used sleight-of-hand techniques to plant explosives in impossible locations. In Sao Paulo, street artist Valentina Cruz organized guerrilla theater that confused BlackHFY occupying forces, who couldn't distinguish between performance and genuine surrender. In Mumbai, quantum physicist Dr. Annika Rowe began broadcasting white noise that somehow interfered with alien communication arrays, not through superior technology, but through patterns so illogical they crashed BlackHFY prediction software. The beauty of human resistance lay not in its effectiveness, but in its complete unpredictability. While the BlackHFY waited for organized military response, humans attacked with flash mobs, interpretive dance, and deliberately terrible poetry recited at maximum volume through hijacked PA systems. "Sir?" Vrendok reported, his voice carrying the first note of uncertainty. "We're detecting anomalous resistance patterns." BlackHFY studied the tactical displays, his confidence wavering as he watched human activities that defied every strategic model in their database. They weren't fighting like a cornered military force. They were fighting like artists, inventors, and lunatics. For the first time in his military career, Admiral BlackHFY realized that overwhelming firepower might not be enough. 3 days into the occupation, BlackHFY ground forces found themselves facing an enemy that made no tactical sense. Commander Jelnos stood in the ruins of downtown Seattle, staring at a massive chalk mural that had appeared overnight on the side of a bombed building. The artwork depicted VexIthera soldiers, but with flower crowns and butterfly wings. "It serves no strategic purpose," he muttered into his communicator, "yet they risk capture to create decorations." His squad had been chasing the artist for 6 blocks, only to find themselves led through a maze of identical coffee shops, each playing different genres of human music at maximum volume. The cacophony had triggered sensory overload in 2 of his soldiers, and the artistic criminal had vanished somewhere between a death metal cafe and a shop that sold nothing but different varieties of foam. Dr. Voss monitored VexIthera communications. From her underground command center, a smile playing across her lips as she listened to increasingly frustrated alien reports. "They're asking their computers why humans waste resources on non-functional aesthetic expressions during wartime," she reported to General Cray. "And what are their computers telling them?" Cray asked. "Error messages, mostly." Voss pulled up intercepted data streams. "Their entire military doctrine is based on rational actor theory. They can't process behavior that prioritizes beauty over survival." Meanwhile, in the occupied territories, human creativity was weaponizing itself in ways that would have made Sun Tzu weep with laughter. In London, former theater director Phineas Drakemore organized surrender ceremonies that turned into elaborate musicals, complete with choreographed dance numbers that somehow always ended with VexIthera soldiers trapped in human pyramids while civilians escaped singing show tunes. Chef Magnolia Hartwell turned her food truck into a mobile disruption unit, serving VexIthera soldiers meals so unexpectedly delicious that they began abandoning their posts to follow her around, trying to understand why consuming nutritional matter could produce emotional responses their species had never experienced. The most devastating human weapon, however, was Professor Quinlan Ashworth, a philosophy teacher who had weaponized the Socratic method. He approached VexIthera checkpoints not with bombs or bullets, but with questions. "Why do you follow orders?" he would ask, his voice carrying the gentle curiosity of someone genuinely interested in the answer. "Orders maintain unit cohesion and mission effectiveness," the soldiers would respond, as programmed. But who decided effectiveness was the highest value? And what if the mission itself serves no meaningful purpose? Within hours, entire VexIthera units were sitting in circles, debating the philosophical foundations of their own existence, while human civilians walked freely past their abandoned posts. The alien high command watched in horror as their soldiers began asking questions like, "What is the meaning of conquest?" and "Does individual identity matter in a collective species?" Admiral Kessitar received reports that defied every known law of military engagement. In New York, humans had turned Central Park into an impromptu festival, complete with alien soldiers who had inexplicably joined a drum circle. In Berlin, a VexIthera platoon had gone AWOL after attending an underground spoken word event that had made them feel emotions they lacked words for. "Sir," Rendock approached his commander with visible hesitation, "the psychological warfare specialists request permission to study human comedy as a potential weapon." "Comedy?" Kessitar's mandibles twitched with confusion. "Apparently, humans can weaponize their own suffering by making light of it? The resulting cognitive dissonance is causing system crashes in our behavioral prediction algorithms." On Earth's surface, comedian Elena Brightness stood on a pile of rubble that had once been a McDonald's, addressing a crowd of humans and confused aliens through a megaphone powered by a bicycle generator. "So these aliens come all the way across the galaxy to conquer us," she began, "and they don't even have a plan for what to do with our student loan debt. I mean, talk about failing to think things through." The laughter that erupted from the crowd somehow made the devastation around them seem less devastating, and the 3 VexIthera soldiers assigned to monitor the area found themselves genuinely puzzled by how organized sound patterns could transform emotional states. For the first time in their species' history, the VexIthera were encountering something their computers couldn't model: the illogical resilience of hope disguised as humor. By the second week, the Vexthara High Command was questioning fundamental assumptions about warfare that had served them across 17 successful conquests. Admiral Kessiter stood before a holographic war room display that showed Earth's resistance activities, each data point pulsing with incomprehensible human behavior. "Explain to me," he addressed his senior staff, "how a species with no significant spacefaring military continues to operate with increasing effectiveness under full occupation." Commander Yelthas, his chief strategic analyst, manipulated the display to highlight resistance hotspots. "Sir, they appear to be using randomness as a tactical doctrine. Our predictive algorithms require patterns to function, but human activities follow no discernible logic." In Detroit, former automotive engineer Caldwell Ironwright had repurposed abandoned car factories into mobile resistance workshops. But instead of building weapons, they were constructing art installations that moved. Giant mechanical flowers that walked on spider legs appeared overnight in occupied zones, playing recordings of children's laughter while spraying glitter from their petals. The Vexthara soldiers couldn't classify these devices as weapons. They posed no direct threat, yet their presence somehow improved human morale while causing alien troops to experience what their medics could only describe as aesthetic confusion syndrome. Dr. Voss coordinated the chaos from her bunker, but even she was amazed by humanity's intuitive understanding of psychological warfare. "We're not fighting their army," she explained to a gathering of resistance leaders connected via quantum-encrypted poetry broadcasts. "We're fighting their sanity." The most effective human operative was perhaps Zephyr Wildwind, a former corporate consultant who had discovered that aliens responded to human bureaucracy the same way humans responded to cosmic horror. She established compliance checkpoints throughout occupied territories, where Vexthara soldiers were required to fill out forms explaining their presence. "Purpose of patrol?" she would ask, clipboard in hand. "Maintaining security perimeter." They would respond, "Security against what specific threat?" "Hostile human activities." Please define hostile using only pre-approved terminology from subsection 47B of the Occupation Conduct Manual. After 6 hours of paperwork, most Vexthara patrols would simply turn around and patrol somewhere else, leaving human neighborhoods effectively unguarded. The aliens' rigid hierarchical structure meant they couldn't simply ignore proper procedures, even when those procedures were obviously designed to waste their time. Meanwhile, former circus performer Arabella Stormcrow had weaponized her background. In physical comedy, organizing stumbling brigades that followed Vexthara units while pretending to trip over their own feet. The constant stream of apparently accidental collisions, dropped objects, and coincidental clumsiness created the impression of hostile activity while maintaining complete plausible deniability. "We're not attacking them," she explained to her team of reformed mime artists and retired clowns. "We're just existing near them very poorly." The psychological impact was devastating. Vexthara soldiers, trained to respond to clear threats, found themselves helpless against enemies who apologized profusely for every disruption while somehow managing to disrupt everything they attempted to accomplish. Admiral Kessiter reviewed daily reports with growing disbelief. "They've turned their own incompetence into a weapon system?" "Apparently, sir. Our soldiers are requesting transfers to other galaxies." The breaking point came when renowned physicist Dr. Oriana Blackthorne published her theory of weaponized nonsense through hijacked alien communication channels. Her paper, written in impeccable academic language, presented mathematical proofs that chaos could be more efficient than order under specific conditions. "The Vexthara," she wrote, "have optimized their forces for fighting rational opponents. But rationality is merely one possible response to existence. By embracing systematic irrationality, humans can exploit the computational gaps in enemy decision-making processes. The paper included footnotes written in haiku, mathematical equations that spelled out song lyrics when solved, and a bibliography that consisted entirely of fortune cookie messages. Yet somehow, the core argument was mathematically sound, creating cognitive dissonance in every Vexithara analyst who attempted to refute it. Within hours, alien command posts were receiving philosophical questions from their own troops. If chaos can be systematic, is system itself chaotic? And how do we defeat an enemy that defeats itself better than we can defeat them? The once mighty Vexithara war machine began showing its first signs of genuine confusion, and Dr. Voss knew they were approaching the critical phase of their impossible victory. The fourth week of occupation brought unprecedented chaos to Vexithara command structures. What had begun as routine conquest had devolved into what their military historians would later classify as philosophical warfare, a concept that didn't exist in their tactical manuals. Admiral Kessitar found himself in the unprecedented position of holding court with his senior officers not to plan military operations, but to debate the nature of reality itself. The transformation had begun when Professor Quinlan Ashworth's interrogation techniques had spread throughout the occupied territories. "Sir," Commander Zelnos reported, his usual crisp efficiency replaced by visible uncertainty, "the 3rd Assault Battalion has requested permission to attend a human lecture series on the meaning of conquest in post-colonial framework." "Denied," Kessitar replied automatically, then paused. "What is post-colonial framework?" The question hung in the air like an unexploded ordnance. For a species that had conquered 17 worlds, the concept of examining their own actions through the lens of those they'd conquered was cognitively revolutionary. On Earth's surface, the resistance had evolved beyond random acts of creativity into something approaching organized absurdity. Former librarian Cordelia Moonwhisper had established mobile philosophy units, repurposed ice cream trucks that roamed occupied neighborhoods, playing soothing music while broadcasting gentle questions about existence, purpose, and the nature of free will. "Today's question," her melodious voice would announce, "is whether a being can truly possess another being, or whether the act of possession actually changes the possessor more than the possessed." Vexithara soldiers, programmed to monitor human communications for strategic intelligence, found themselves listening to these broadcasts with growing fascination. Their entire species had been built around collective efficiency, but they'd never considered whether efficiency itself was worth pursuing. The most dangerous human weapon proved to be former debate coach Miranda Silverback, who had established democratic decision-making workshops in abandoned shopping malls. Vexithara patrols, trained to gather intelligence on human activities, would observe these sessions where humans argued passionately about everything from resource allocation to the optimal way to organize resistance activities. "The beauty of democracy," Silverback would explain to mixed audiences of humans and aliens, "is that nobody gets exactly what they want, but everyone gets to complain about it." This concept that functional society could emerge from organized disagreement was fundamentally incomprehensible to the Vexithara hive mind. Their soldiers began requesting permission to participate in these workshops, claiming it was necessary for intelligence gathering. Admiral Kessitar watched his occupying force slowly dissolve into discussion groups. "How?" he asked his remaining loyal officers. "Does a species maintain unit cohesion while constantly arguing with itself?" The question was answered by former game designer Jasper Nightingale, who had turned occupied city centers into elaborate live-action role-playing games. Humans, and increasingly curious aliens, would spend hours negotiating fictional scenarios that somehow always ended up reflecting real-world power dynamics. "The trick," Nightingale explained to a mixed group playing galactic diplomacy, "is that everyone gets to be right about different things at different times. Leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking better questions." The BlackHFY players, initially there to monitor human activities, found themselves genuinely engaged in scenarios where cooperation produced better outcomes than dominance. For soldiers trained from birth to follow orders without question, the experience of successfully leading through consensus was cognitively revolutionary. Dr. Voss monitored the growing philosophical crisis in BlackHFY ranks with professional fascination. "They're experiencing what anthropologists call cultural cognitive dissonance," she reported to General Cray. "Their entire worldview is predicated on the superiority of organized hierarchy, but they're seeing functional alternatives everywhere they look." The crisis reached its peak when former University Chancellor Dr. Beatrice Stormwright published an open letter to our galactic visitors through hijacked military communications. The letter didn't mock or condemn the invasion. Instead, it expressed genuine curiosity about BlackHFY culture and invited them to participate in what she called interspecies cultural exchange. "We understand you've come here to expand your territory," she wrote, "but have you considered that conquest might be less efficient than collaboration? We'd love to learn about your technology, your art, your philosophy. What questions do your people ask when they're not following orders?" The letter ended with an invitation to a galactic cultural festival in Central Park, complete with human food, music, and what she described as the dangerous joy of unstructured social interaction. Within days, BlackHFY soldiers were abandoning their posts not to desert, but to attend what was essentially the galaxy's first interspecies potluck dinner. Admiral Kessatar realized his army was no longer interested in conquest. They were interested in conversation. Central Park had been transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history, a meeting ground where conquerors and conquered sat in circles, sharing food and existential questions. Dr. Beatrice Stormwright moved through the gathering like a gracious host at the universe's most unusual dinner party, introducing BlackHFY soldiers to human concepts they lacked words for. "This is improvisation," she explained to Commander Vrendock, gesturing toward a mixed group of humans and aliens attempting to create music together. "The beauty isn't in getting it right, it's in the moment when you realize there is no right to get." Vrendock, who had spent his career following protocols designed for every conceivable scenario, watched in fascination as beings created harmony without predetermined rules. A human child was teaching a BlackHFY warrior to play kazoo while a former alien communications officer attempted to explain the mathematical beauty of their quantum-encrypted poetry to a group of impressed human artists. Admiral Kestar observed the festival from his command ship, his 4 eyes reflecting growing uncertainty. "Report," he demanded of his tactical staff. "Sir," Commander Yelthus replied carefully, 62% of our ground forces are currently participating in what humans call cultural exchange. They claim it's intelligence gathering, but our monitors indicate they're primarily engaged in activities involving shared consumption of food and discussion of philosophical concepts. And the other 38%? Requesting permission to join them, sir. The festival had become something more than resistance or occupation. It had become a genuine attempt at interspecies understanding. Former chef Magnolia Hartwell had established the Empathy Kitchen, where BlackHFY soldiers learned to cook human food while humans attempted to understand alien nutritional requirements. "Cooking," she explained to a group of warrior chefs, "is about transformation. You take simple ingredients and through care, attention, and a little creativity, you create something that feeds not just the body, but the soul." The BlackHFY had never encountered the concept of food as emotional expression. Their nutrition was efficient, optimized, and utterly flavorless. But watching humans create elaborate meals as acts of love was revolutionizing their understanding of resource allocation. Meanwhile, Professor Quinlan Ashworth had established the Question Garden, a section of the park where beings could post their deepest uncertainties on a giant tree made from repurposed communication equipment. BlackHFY soldiers, trained never to question orders, began anonymously contributing questions that revealed the profound loneliness of a hive-mind species. "What would I be if I weren't a soldier?" one note read. "Do we conquer because we choose to, or because we don't know how to choose anything else?" asked another. The most profound transformation occurred when former circus performer Arabella Stormcrow organized the Trust Exercise Pavilion. Humans and aliens participated in activities that required vulnerability and mutual support, concepts that challenged every assumption about interspecies relations. "Trust," she explained to a mixed group attempting to catch each other in controlled falls, "isn't about knowing someone won't hurt you. It's about believing they don't want to." For BlackHFY soldiers programmed to see all non-BlackHFY as potential threats, the experience of being caught by human hands was cognitively revolutionary. Gradually, they began to understand that strength could come from interdependence rather than dominance. Dr. Voss watched the festival through surveillance feeds, marveling at what was occurring. "They're not surrendering to us," she told General Cray. "And we're not surrendering to them. We're all surrendering to the possibility that there might be better ways to exist together." The breakthrough came during what became known as the Great Question Exchange. Humans and BlackHFY sat in enormous circles, taking turns asking the questions they'd never been allowed to voice. "Why do you make art?" asked a BlackHFY engineer. "Why do you follow orders you disagree with?" responded a human philosopher. "What frightens you most about being individual?" inquired an alien soldier. "What frightens you most about being collective?" replied a human artist. The conversation continued for hours, with each species discovering that their deepest fears and greatest hopes weren't so different. The BlackHFY feared meaninglessness without structure. Humans feared meaninglessness despite freedom. Both species were struggling with the fundamental question of how to create purpose in a vast, indifferent universe. As the sun set over Central Park, Admiral Kessatar made a decision that would echo through galactic history. He requested a shuttle to the surface. "Sir?" Vrendok asked. "I have questions," Kestar replied, "that apparently can only be answered on the ground." The festival was about to receive its most unexpected visitor. The shuttle that landed in Central Park carried more than just Admiral Kessatar. It carried the weight of 17 conquered worlds and the possibility of a different kind of first contact. As the BlackHFY Supreme Commander emerged, the festival's mixed crowd fell silent, uncertain whether they were witnessing surrender or escalation. Dr. Beatrice Stormwright approached him with the same welcoming demeanor she'd shown every other visitor. "Admiral," she said simply, "we saved you a seat." Kessatar's 4 eyes swept across the gathering, his soldiers sharing meals with humans, engaged in artistic creation, asking questions that no military manual had prepared them for. "I came," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command and confusion, "to understand what has happened to my army." "They've discovered curiosity," replied former philosopher Quinlan Ashworth, stepping forward. "Perhaps the more interesting question is, what happened to you that made curiosity seem dangerous?" The question struck at the heart of BlackHFY society. For millennia, their species had valued efficiency above exploration, conquest above creativity. The idea that curiosity might be more powerful than control was fundamentally threatening to everything they'd built. Chef Magnolia Hartwell approached with a bowl of soup. "In human culture," she said, offering it to the Admiral, "we share food as a gesture of peace. This is tomato basil. It serves no nutritional optimization purpose, but it might help you understand why we value inefficiency." Kessatar accepted the bowl, studying the red liquid with scientific fascination. His first taste was a revelation, not because the soup was particularly remarkable, but because it represented the human capacity to find meaning in the unnecessary. "You waste resources," he observed, "on experiences that serve no survival function." "We invest resources," corrected Dr. Voss, joining the conversation, "in experiences that make survival worthwhile. There's a difference between existing efficiently and living meaningfully." The Admiral found himself surrounded not by captors or conquered subjects, but by beings genuinely interested in understanding his perspective. Former game designer Jasper Nightingale invited him to observe a role-playing session where humans and BlackHFY were collaboratively creating a fictional society that incorporated both species' strengths. "The fascinating thing," Nightingale explained, "is that when we remove the constraint of dominance, both species become more creative. Your technological efficiency combined with our adaptive creativity could solve problems neither of us could handle alone." Kessatar watched his soldiers enthusiastically participating in scenarios where cooperation produced outcomes superior to conquest. "This is not what our models predicted." "Models," observed former debate coach Miranda Silverback, "are only as good as the assumptions they're built on. What if your assumption about the necessity of conquest was wrong?" The conversation that followed would be remembered as the philosophical breakthrough of 2157. Admiral Kessatar, for the first time in his career, found himself in a discussion where his questions were met not with automatic compliance, but with better questions. "If we don't conquer," he asked, "how do we expand our territory?" "What if," responded comedian Elena Brightness, "instead of expanding your territory, you expanded your possibilities? You came here with enough firepower to glass the planet, but you didn't have enough imagination to envision what you might build together with us." The moment of transformation came when former librarian Cordelia Moonwhisper presented the Admiral with something unprecedented, a book written collaboratively by humans and BlackHFY soldiers over the past week. It was part technical manual, part philosophical treatise, and part collection of poetry. A fusion of both species' approaches to understanding reality. "Your people," she explained, "have contributed extraordinary insights about efficiency and systematic thinking. Our people have shared perspectives on adaptability and creative problem-solving. Neither approach alone could have produced this." Kessatar read pages that seamlessly blended BlackHFY precision with human intuition, creating ideas that transcended what either species could achieve independently. For the first time, he glimpsed what collaboration might accomplish that conquest never could. As the evening deepened, the Admiral found himself participating in what humans called a campfire circle, beings sharing stories, songs, and questions under the stars. A young BlackHFY soldier spoke about dreams of exploration rather than conquest. A human child asked whether aliens ever felt lonely in space. "I have spent my career," Kessatar said finally, "believing that strength came from dominance. But, observing this gathering, I wonder if we have been confusing strength with fear." The festival had become something unprecedented, not victory or defeat, but transformation. Both species were discovering that the universe was large enough for multiple approaches to existence, and that diversity of thought might be more valuable than uniformity of purpose. Admiral Kessatar made his decision as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. 3 months after the failed invasion, Admiral Kessatar stood in the United Nations General Assembly, addressing a gathering that included representatives from Earth and 17 formerly conquered worlds. The BlackHFY fleet still hung in Earth's orbit, but the ships now served as orbital research stations, where mixed crews worked on projects that neither species could have imagined alone. "We came to your world," he began, his translated words, carrying throughout the packed assembly hall, believing that conquest was the highest form of organization. "We have learned that collaboration is the highest form of evolution." Dr. Beatrice Stormwright, now serving as Earth's first interspecies cultural ambassador, watched from the diplomatic section. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Entire Vexthara command structures had to be reimagined, and human societies struggled to integrate beings who thought in terms of collective consciousness rather than individual identity. The breakthrough had come when former quantum physicist Dr. Oriana Blackthorne proposed what became known as the complementary consciousness model. Instead of trying to make either species abandon their fundamental nature, they developed systems that allowed collective and individual thinking to enhance each other. Consider, she had explained during the early integration planning, that your hive mind consciousness provides unprecedented coordination, while our individual consciousness provides unprecedented innovation. Rather than seeing these as opposing systems, what if they're complementary technologies for processing reality? The result was the formation of the Galactic Cooperative, not an empire built on conquest, but a federation built on the radical idea that diversity of thought was the universe's greatest resource. Professor Quinlan Ashworth had established the first Interspecies Philosophy Institute, where beings from multiple worlds gathered to explore questions that transcended any single culture's perspective. The most profound discoveries, he often said, come not from having the right answers, but from asking questions no one culture would think to ask alone. Former chef Magnolia Hartwell had become the director of cultural exchange through shared experience, organizing festivals throughout the galaxy where beings learned about each other through food, art, and play. Her mobile kitchens had become symbols of peaceful contact, proof that the first step toward understanding any species was sharing a meal with them. The economic transformation had been equally revolutionary. Instead of resource extraction through conquest, the cooperative developed what economist Dr. Valentina Cruz called creative abundance theory, the idea that collaboration could generate more resources than competition could claim. When the Vexthara shared their mastery of energy manipulation with our mastery of chaotic innovation, she explained, we didn't just solve our energy crisis. We invented entirely new forms of energy that neither species had imagined. The 17 previously conquered worlds had voted unanimously to join the cooperative rather than revert to independence. As Zephyr Wildwind, now Director of Bureaucratic Efficiency, a position that would have been impossible to explain before first contact, noted, it turns out beings prefer being invited to participate in something meaningful rather than being forced to submit to something arbitrary. The most significant change was philosophical. Comedian Elena Brightness, whose humor had helped break down the psychological barriers between species, now traveled the galaxy performing for mixed audiences. The thing about conquest, she would say in her act, is that it's based on the assumption that there's not enough universe for everyone. But the universe is expanding faster than we can explore it. The only scarcity is in our imagination. Admiral Kessitar concluded his address to the Assembly with words that would be carved on monuments throughout the galaxy. We invaded Earth with firepower, but not enough imagination. Humanity defeated us not with superior weapons, but with superior questions. Today, we launch not ships of conquest, but expeditions of curiosity, joint missions to discover what wonders await beings who choose to explore together rather than dominate separately. The applause that filled the assembly hall was joined by harmonic resonances from Vexthara participants, the first time in galactic history that the sound of celebration had been truly interspecies. As the formal session ended, Kessitar joined Dr. Stormwright and other cooperative leaders in Central Park, where the original festival site had been converted into a permanent interspecies cultural center. Children from dozens of worlds played, games that no single species could have invented while their parents planned expeditions to regions of space that would require both human creativity and Vexthara precision to explore. "What's our next question?" asked former librarian Cordelia Moonwhisper, now Director of Galactic Curiosity Studies. Dr. Voss, reviewing data from the edge of known space, smiled. "We've detected signals from the Andromeda Galaxy that suggest organized activity. The question is, Are we ready to meet them not as conquerors or conquered, but as friends with really good questions? The laughter that erupted from the gathered beings, human, Vexthara, and representatives from 17 other worlds, echoed across Central Park and up toward the stars, where ships from multiple species prepared for humanity's first export. The dangerous, revolutionary idea that the universe was big enough for everyone's dreams. In the end, Earth's greatest victory wasn't defeating the invasion, it was transforming the invaders into explorers, and themselves from a single world's worth of dreamers into a galaxy's worth of friends with infinite questions and the collaborative wisdom to explore the answers together. The universe had just become a much more interesting place.